Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
It was a Tuesday evening, the kind that lulled you into a false sense of security. The smell of rosemary chicken wafted through the kitchen as I set the table. Patrick sat at the head, scrolling through his phone, while our daughter, Anaya, hummed softly, coloring at her usual spot. A serene family moment until he shattered it. "I've decided something," Patrick announced, setting his phone down with a deliberate thud. His tone was calm, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness that made me pause mid-step. "Oh?" I said cautiously, glancing at him. I recognized that tone. It wasn't an invitation for discussion, it was a proclamation. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Mom's moving in with us next month. She's getting older, and it's time she had someone to take care of her." The room seemed to shrink around me. "What?" The word came out sharper than I intended, but I couldn't mask the shock. "Patrick, this is my parents' house. It's not a decision you can just." He cut me off, his voice louder now. "I pay the rent, Stephanie. I pay for the groceries, the utilities, everything. This is my house too." My stomach churned. His words weren't just dismissive. They were a deliberate reminder of the financial imbalance between us. Yes, he worked full-time, but I contributed too, managing the house, caring for Anaya, and working part-time to cover smaller expenses. Yet, in his eyes, that counted for nothing. "I understand you want to help your mother," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But this is something we should decide together. My parents left this house to me, Patrick. It's not just a building, it's part of my family's legacy." "Legacy?" He scoffed, shaking his head. "Stephanie, it's just a house. And your legacy isn't paying the bills. Mom needs us. End of story." His dismissiveness stung, but what hit me harder was the certainty in his tone. He'd already made up his mind, and my feelings didn't factor into it. I glanced at Anaya, her small frame hunched over her coloring book, blissfully unaware of the tension crackling in the room. "What about my office?" I asked, shifting tactics. "Where will I work?" Patrick waved a hand dismissively. "We'll turn it into a bedroom for her. You can set up your stuff in the living room or something. It's not a big deal." Not a big deal. My chest tightened. My office wasn't just a workspace. It was my refuge, the only place in the house that still felt like mine. The thought of losing it, to Peyton, of all people, was unbearable. "I don't agree with this," I said finally, meeting his gaze. "You can't make this decision without me." "I already have," he said coldly, "and unless you're planning to start covering the rent and utilities, it's not your decision to make." I felt the tears welling up but swallowed them down. Crying wouldn't help. "This isn't fair, Patrick," I said softly, my voice trembling. "You're not listening to me." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Fair? Life isn't fair, Stephanie. Mom's moving in. That's final." With that, he left the room, leaving me standing there. A mix of anger, frustration, and helplessness churning inside me. I looked at Anaya, her bright eyes flickering up to meet mine. "Is Daddy mad?" she asked innocently. I forced a smile, kneeling beside her. "No, sweetheart," I lied. "Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. As I tucked Anaya into bed that night, my mind raced. Peyton moving in was more than just an inconvenience. It felt like an invasion. The house, my safe haven, was slipping away from me piece by piece, and Patrick didn't care. Or worse, he did, and it didn't matter to him. Lying awake in the dark, I tried to push the nagging thoughts aside. But one question refused to be silenced. If he's willing to take this from me, what's next? The sound of tires crunching against the gravel driveway sent a chill down my spine. Patrick had gone to pick up his mother from the station, and now they were here. I peered out the living room window, my chest tightening as I spotted Peyton stepping out of the car. A polished smile plastered on her face. She was dressed impeccably, as always, in a tailored coat and heels far too impractical for our modest home. Patrick emerged from the driver's side, his hand reaching out to steady her. "Careful, Mom," he said with a warmth I hadn't heard from him in weeks. I gripped the edge of the windowsill, trying to suppress the surge of irritation. This wasn't just an unwelcome visit, it was the start of a takeover. "Stephanie," Patrick called out as he opened the front door. "Come help with the bags." I forced a smile and stepped outside, the chill in the air matching the frost in my demeanor. "Peyton," I said politely, "welcome." She didn't answer right away, her sharp eyes scanning the house as if appraising its worth. Finally, she turned to me with a faint smile. It's quaint. Quaint, my jaw tightened. This house was my sanctuary, my connection to my parents' memory, and she dismissed it with a single word. "I'll show you to your room," Patrick interjected, cutting through the tension. He grabbed her suitcase and led her inside, leaving me to close the door behind them. The first crack in my composure came when I followed them into the hallway. My office, my personal space, was unrecognizable. The desk was gone, replaced by a bed and a floral comforter that screamed Peyton. My bookshelves had been pushed against the wall, their contents boxed up and shoved into a corner. Peyton clicked her tongue as she surveyed the room. "It'll do for now," she said, smoothing a hand over the bedspread. "Though I'll need to make a few adjustments." "Adjustments?" I echoed, unable to hide my irritation. "Yes," she replied matter-of-factly. "This wallpaper is dreadfully outdated, and the lighting could use an upgrade. Don't you agree, Patrick?" He shrugged. "Whatever you need, Mom. We'll take care of it." I'd opened my mouth to protest, but Peyton was already moving on. "Oh, and where do you keep the fine china, Stephanie? I prefer using proper dishes for dinner, not those mismatched plates I saw in the kitchen." "Fine china?" I hadn't used it since my parents passed, and it wasn't for everyday meals. "The plates we have are perfectly fine," I said firmly. Peyton arched a brow, as if I'd just suggested serving dinner on paper plates. "Well, I suppose we'll have to make do," she said with a sigh that was anything but subtle. Patrick shot me a warning glance. "Can we not do this now?" "Do what?" I snapped, my voice low but sharp. "I'm not the one making demands." "Stephanie," he said, his tone tight. "Mom just got here. Can you try to be a little more accommodating?" Accommodating. The word rattled around in my mind like a loose screw. I bit back the words I wanted to say and turned on my heel, retreating to the kitchen. As I poured myself a glass of water, the sound of Peyton's laughter floated down the hallway, followed by Patrick's voice, warm and easy. It was a sound I hadn't heard directed at me in months. The trigger came an hour later when I returned to the hallway to retrieve something from the storage closet. Peyton was standing in the doorway of Anaya's room, her arms crossed. "You really let her keep her toys scattered like this?" she asked, her tone dripping with disapproval. "A little discipline would go a long way." I stepped forward, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "Anaya's room is her space. She's 5, Peyton. Toys come with the territory." Peyton didn't flinch. "I'm just saying, children need structure, and with how Patrick works so hard, you should be the one to set it." The implication hit me like a slap. She wasn't just criticizing my parenting, she was undermining me. And Patrick, who stood behind her, said nothing. That night, as I lay awake in bed, my mind churned with a single thought. This wasn't just her moving in. This was a battle for control, and I was losing. The morning light crept through the blinds, doing little to chase away the heaviness in my chest. I sat at the kitchen table, my untouched coffee growing cold beside me. Peyton's presence had already begun to suffocate the house. Her voice, sharp and commanding, echoed from the living room as she criticized Anaya for leaving a crayon on the couch. Patrick, as always, was silent, letting her words hang in the air like unspoken rules I was expected to obey. I couldn't take it anymore. Something had to change. The trigger came when Peyton stormed into the kitchen, holding one of my favorite mugs. "Stephanie," she said with an exaggerated sigh, "this cup has a chip in it. I've taken the liberty of setting it aside for disposal. Really, you should be more mindful about the things you use." "That mug belonged to my mother," I said, my voice calm but cold. "It's not going anywhere." She tilted her head, her lips curling into a faint smirk. "Sentimentality is charming, but practicality is better. Don't you agree, Patrick?" she called over her shoulder. Patrick entered, a frown already forming. "What's going on now?" Before I could speak, Peyton answered for me. "I was just trying to help Stephanie declutter. Honestly, I don't know how you've managed all this time, living in such chaos." I clenched my fists under the table, my heart pounding in my ears. This wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration of war. "I need some air," I muttered, grabbing my coat and stepping outside before either of them could respond. I drove straight to my father's house, the one place I knew I'd find clarity. William, my rock in times of turmoil, opened the door with a smile that quickly faded when he saw my face. "What happened?" he asked, leading me inside. "It's Peyton," I said, sinking onto the couch. "She's treating my house like it's hers. She's criticizing everything I do, and Patrick just lets her." William sat beside me, his brow furrowed. "You know you don't have to put up with this." "But it's not just about me," I said, my voice trembling. "It's about Anaya. I won't let Peyton's influence poison her childhood." He nodded, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "Good. So what are you going to do about it?" "I need to take back control," I said, the words spilling out in a rush. "Legally, the house is in my name. I can draft a rental agreement that forces Patrick and Peyton to pay their share. If they don't, they'll have to leave." William leaned back, a small smile playing on his lips. "Now you're thinking, I can help you draw up the paperwork." That evening, I returned home with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. Peyton was in the kitchen, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the counter as she prepared tea. "Stephanie," she said without looking up, "you're late. I was beginning to wonder if you'd abandoned us." "Don't worry," I said, my voice steady. "I'm right where I need to be." Upstairs, I found Patrick in our bedroom scrolling through his phone. He looked up as I closed the door behind me. "We need to talk," I said. He sighed, setting the phone down. "About what now?" "This house," I said, meeting his gaze. "It's in my name. And if you and Peyton are going to stay here, you'll need to start paying rent." Patrick blinked, stunned into silence. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," I said. "This isn't just about me, it's about Anaya. I won't let her grow up in a home where I have no say." "You're being unreasonable," he said, his tone sharpening. "This is our family, Stephanie." "Then start treating me like a part of it," I shot back, "because right now it feels like I'm just a guest in my own home." For the first time in weeks, Patrick had no response, and as I walked out of the room, a wave of determination washed over me. This was just the beginning. I was done playing by their rules. Peyton's voice carried down the hall, sharp and authoritative. "Anaya, don't touch that. You'll ruin it." Her words were punctuated by the crash of something shattering, followed by Anaya's startled cry. My heart sank as I rushed into the living room to find my daughter standing frozen, her wide eyes brimming with tears. Peyton stood over her, one hand on her hip, the other holding a broken vase. "This is why children need supervision," she snapped, her gaze darting toward me as I knelt beside Anaya, pulling her close. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered, smoothing her hair. "It was just an accident." Peyton huffed, tossing the broken pieces onto the coffee table with a clatter. "Accident or not, this is why I keep telling Patrick that this house needs proper discipline. Honestly, Stephanie, don't you see how this reflects on your parenting?" Her words cut like a knife, but I refused to let her see me flinch. "Anaya is a child, Peyton, not a soldier. Accidents happen." As I ushered Anaya to her room, Peyton's muttering followed me. "If you don't shape up soon, maybe I'll just have to step in." That was it. The comment that sent a chill through me. Step in where? The idea simmered in my mind as I put Anaya down for her nap. Peyton wasn't just overstepping, she was preparing to take over entirely. I returned to the living room to find Peyton boxing up books from my shelves. "What are you doing?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "Oh, this? I figured these old things could go into storage. I need the space for my belongings," she replied without looking up. "This is my home," I said, each word deliberate. "You don't get to make those decisions." She finally turned, her smile icy. "Patrick and I discussed this. Since he's paying the bills, I'd say we have equal say." The audacity of her words made my pulse quicken, and my voice rose despite myself. "Equal say? This house was left to me by my parents. You don't get to erase that just because you feel entitled." "Entitled?" Peyton's tone was venomous. "I'm trying to make this place functional for the family." "For the family or for yourself?" I snapped, the tension in my chest threatening to boil over. At that moment, Patrick walked in, holding a bag of groceries. He looked between us and sighed. "What's going on now?" "Your wife seems to think she can dictate how this house is run," Peyton said, crossing her arms. Patrick set the bag down and looked at me as though I were a child throwing a tantrum. Stephanie, I told you Mom needs her space. Why can't you just compromise? Compromise? I echoed, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Your mother has taken over my home, criticized my parenting, and now she's packing up my things without my permission. He pinched the bridge of his nose. This isn't that big of a deal. You're overreacting. Overreacting. The word hung in the air like a slap. I swallowed hard and turned to Peyton. If you touch one more thing in this house, you'll regret it. Oh, is that a threat? She mocked, smirking as though she'd already won. No, it's a promise, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Without another word, I turned and walked away. The final straw had been pulled. Peyton and Patrick had made their intentions clear. I didn't belong in my own home anymore, but I wasn't leaving quietly. That night, as I lay in bed, I made a silent vow. Anaya and I would be safe, and we would be free of this toxic situation. It was time to act. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, legal documents spread before me. My father, William, had come over early, offering his steadfast support. The rental agreement we had drafted sat at the top of the pile, a trump card that could force Patrick and Peyton into a corner. Are you ready for this? My father asked, sipping his coffee. I hesitated, staring at the document. Ready or not, I don't have a choice. They've left me no room to breathe. Anaya deserves better. Before I could second-guess myself, Patrick walked into the kitchen, looking groggy. Peyton followed shortly after, her smug expression firmly in place. It was time. I need to talk to both of you, I said, standing tall. My voice didn't waver, even as my stomach churned. Patrick frowned. Can this wait? I haven't had my coffee. No, it can't, I replied sharply, sliding the document across the table. This is a rental agreement. As of today, if you want to live in this house, you'll need to pay market rate rent. Otherwise, you'll have 30 days to vacate. The room fell silent. Patrick picked up the paper, his eyes narrowing as he read. Peyton snatched it from him before he could finish. This is outrageous, she spat. You can't just kick us out. It's not outrageous, Peyton, I said calmly. This is my home. You've both made it clear that you have no respect for me or my boundaries. I'm done being ignored and belittled. Patrick's jaw tightened. Stephanie, let's not escalate things. We're a family. No, I said firmly. A family doesn't treat each other like this. You've let your mother take over everything, Patrick, and I won't stand for it anymore. Peyton leaned forward, her eyes blazing. You don't have the guts to follow through with this. You've always been spineless. That's where you're wrong, I said, meeting her gaze. I found my spine, and I'm not afraid to use it. The tension was palpable as Peyton stormed out of the room, muttering under her breath. Patrick stayed behind, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. You're making a big mistake, Stephanie, he said quietly. You're breaking this family apart. No, Patrick, I replied. You and your mother did that long before I had the courage to stand up for myself. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Patrick tried to contest the rental agreement, but my father's airtight legal preparation held strong. Peyton's behavior grew more erratic, culminating in her attempting to change the locks while I was out. Luckily, a neighbor witnessed it and called me immediately. When their 30 days were up, Patrick and Peyton packed their things, their protests falling on deaf ears. Watching them drive away felt like a weight had been lifted from my chest. Months later, as Anaya and I walked through our now peaceful home, I felt a sense of triumph. We had reclaimed our lives, our space, and our freedom. Yet, an unexpected envelope arrived one day, marked with Patrick's handwriting. Inside was a single letter. I underestimated you, Stephanie. You've proven stronger than I ever gave you credit for. I hope one day Anaya understands I tried to be there for her. Goodbye. I crumpled the letter, feeling no regret. Strength had come at a cost, but I had no doubt it was worth it.